By the end of this video, you'll have a Hermes agent fully set up on a VPS and run it as a useful Java-style assistant which can do all sorts of tasks from handling your schedule to scripting your competitor's Instagram and monitoring trade signals from US Congress members, all with no code. I'll also explain the main difference between Hermes agent and Openclaw with as little technical jargon as possible, so you can fully understand, build, and deploy, even if you have no technical background. So how is Hermes different from Openclaw? To understand either of these, we first need to understand how an agent like this works under the hood. There's a lot of confusing explanations out there, but simply, agents are just LLMs running in a loop. The loop keeps the model going until it either accomplishes a task with a tool call or hits a failure mode. Persistent memory is built on top of each session and gets compressed when the context window grows too large. I'm oversimplifying a lot here, of course, but in principle, if you put an LLM through this loop and add on production-grade error handling and a few good tools, what you get is a Java-style agent that can follow a high-level goal like, book me a plane ticket that fits my schedule, instead of just returning a list of available flights to you for you to make a decision. Now both Openclaw and Hermes runs with the same architecture, but they differ on two main things. Number one, both Openclaw and Hermes retain persistent memory in markdown format. So you've got the usual sol.md, user.md, and agents.md, which are all just markdown files that form an identity layer. The main difference is on the recall layer, when they need to remember things that are just simple mentions or took place in a random conversation. Specifically, they differ in how they index and structure these memories. Openclaw writes memory like a journal. It builds on top of existing memory just like how you'd write a diary. Meanwhile, Hermes adds a session database layer that combines it with a recall mechanism called the Honcho Theory of Mind. Honcho by Plastic Labs is a third-party service that runs in the background, quietly builds that model of you, conversation by conversation. So your agent stops being a thing that remembers facts about you and becomes a thing that actually understands and gets you. This makes Hermes' memory like a searchable archive with optional smart recall. To simplify, Openclaw stores memory the way you journal a diary, while Hermes feels more like a searchable transcript archive, with a librarian that's actually read everything. That's why you might have heard people mentioning that Openclaw's memory gets worse over time. Of course, there's a lot of nuances that I'm leaving out here, like the dialectic API and the semantic searches, but we're not going to get into the weeds here. I just wanted to give you guys a good idea of what the main differences are when it comes to memory recall. Number two, skills evolution. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that skills are basically recipes on how to do certain tasks. For both systems, skills are basically just stored as skill.md or markdown files, which is essentially just fancy text files. That format is identical for both. The difference is who writes and maintains them. In Openclaw, you or the agent under your instruction write the skill once, and the agent runs that recipe verbatim every time. Predictable, version controllable, and you stay firmly in the driver's seat. Hermes adds an autonomous learning loop on top of that. After a complex task, it can save what it just did as a new skill, and refine existing skills as it keeps using them. There's even a research pipeline behind it called Hermes Agent Self-Evolution that uses genetic algorithms to evolve the agent's own prompts against benchmarks. So in practice, if Hermes builds a skill to do a certain task, and you're asking it to do the same task with different kind of preferences, it's going to learn those preferences and actually build on top of the skills that it actually already has. So it's an ever-evolving skill as it gets better and better at doing certain tasks all to your preference. The trade-off is simple. Openclaw stores skill in a static format, while Hermes is imperative to improve her skills over time. So now, let's dive right into deploying your first Hermes agent. We'll be deploying our Hermes agent on a VPS, or a virtual private server. It's basically a private computer that you rent in the cloud to run your Hermes agent. So why would you want to deploy Hermes on a VPS instead of just running it on your computer or a local system? Well, because when you install Hermes in your local system or a computer, it has access to all your system files, all your sensitive files, and all your data. So you might not actually want to install it directly on the computer that you're using. So what most people do, they might go out and buy a Mac Mini and stuff like that. So exactly like Openclaw, you might want to isolate it in your separate system. But in order to do that, you might actually have to go out and buy this local system or Mac Mini, which costs money. And the second thing is the Mac Mini or the computer needs to be plugged in and active 24/7, which might or might not be inconvenient for you. So VPS is always on 24/7, and as long as you set the right security, the agent is sandboxed into that particular VPS. It can't break out of it, it can't reach for files or data that are sensitive to you on your own computer. It just lives in the VPS isolated. Real quick, if you find videos like these useful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. It really does help a lot. When you look at VPS, there are many providers out there that you can choose, but hosting is one of the prominent ones. And incidentally, they have a simple one-click deploy for Hermes agent. So I'm going to link this down in the description below so you can just click on that to access the one-click easy deploy Hermes agent on Hostinger. And once you click on that link, you will actually be led to this page and you can read through the documentation a little bit. But the main thing is that there are a couple of VPS plans that you can choose from, as you can see KVM 1, 2, 4, and 8. The only difference is the same thing as when you're buying a computer. There is the capacity differences. So for example, for KVM 1, you get a 1V CPU core and 4GB RAM, and KVM 2, you get a higher RAM space and more CPUs, and also the disk space and bandwidth as well. And you go up the ladder as you go to KVM 4 and 8. But for the most part, when you're just running the Hermes agent, KVM 2 is more than sufficient for you to scale up and be able to use it long term. So here we're just going to click deploy. All right, so now I'm selecting KVM 2 plan, and here there is a selection of whether you want to try the 1 month plan, 12 months, or 24 months. And of course, if you're going for the 12 and 24 months, it's going to be a lot more economical compared to the 1 month. And if you're considering taking hosting out for a spin, you can use my coupon code, which I'll put down here, as well as down the link description below. And what you can do is just have a coupon code over here and put in automate with Mark. And if you hit apply on that, it's going to show a 10% off for that, and you can hit continue. That said, if you choose to want to run it locally, what you can do is go over to Hermes Agent's website, but I'll also leave the link to this particular page down in the description below. As you can see, it is a one-line install, which you can copy and run in your terminal. So if you're on the Mac, just open up your Finder, hit terminal, and basically just run that one line, and it'll install it in your local system. But of course, as I've said previously, for security reasons, I feel a lot more comfortable running it in VPS, and I do personally run it on hosting as VPS for all my Openclaw as well as Hermes agents. And so once you make your payment, you're going to be redirected to the hosting a HPanel page. And here you're going to choose your server location, and you want to pick the location that's closest to you, because that's going to reduce the back and forth time between your computer and the server, even though it's just in terms of milliseconds, right? But here I'm in Japan right now. So what I want to do is choose somewhere in Asia. So my closest one would be in Indonesia. So once you hit next, this is actually pre-selected for you. So as you can see under Docker application, Hermes agent has already been selected. So you don't actually have to do anything but to scroll down and hit next. And here's going to ask you for an admin username and an admin password. So for admin username, we're just going to call this Hermes demo, let's say, BOM. And for the admin password, you want to save this and keep it secret, of course, because anybody with the admin password and the admin username is going to be able to log into your VPS at this moment without any additional hardening. And once you do that, let's go ahead and deploy. So it's going to take about 5 minutes to spin up the VPS and install everything you need to run the Hermes agent inside the VPS. Then you'll be redirected to the HPanel page. And while that's finishing up the run, I also want to point out that this is not the only way to actually host Hermes. Of course, this is the easiest way because there's a one-click deployment. As you saw, I just needed the one click to actually deploy everything. But if you're familiar with setting up VPS on Hostinger, what you can do is actually get a VPS, and you can run it on Debian or Ubuntu. And similarly, if you were to SSH into your VPS, what you can do is also to run the one-line install into the VPS, and you will actually be able to run Hermes as well. And earlier you saw some mentions about Docker, and don't worry too much about that, because Docker is basically just a prepackaged container that ships your entire app. In this case, your agent, which is the Hermes agent, with all the dependencies that Hermes needs to run within that environment. So you don't need to spend half an afternoon, trying to find the right Python, the versioning mismatch, and spend time looking for missing libraries and stuff like that. Basically stuff that becomes a hiccup when you're trying to run something, because it has all the connected dependencies to make the agent run. So Docker is basically just a box with all these dependencies and the environment required to run the Hermes agent the right way. So that way it makes it easy for you to deploy, which is why you can do the one-click deployment. So now that the VPS is fully deployed, what we want to do is under Docker Manager, which is a page that you're led to anyway, you want to identify the Hermes agent right here and hit open under the Access tab. So once you do that, you're going to be prompted to key in the username and password, which we have earlier. So earlier, our username is Hermes_demo_AWM. And of course, if you don't want to change the username, you can just leave it at Hermes anyway. And password, that's the admin password that you saved earlier. So you want to just paste that in and hit sign in. And of course, you want to keep everything safe. This link itself is publicly available. So here, once you've logged in with your credentials, you're immediately going to go over the setup for Hermes. So here it's going to ask you pretty straightforward sets of questions. How would you like to set up Hermes? This is a quick setup, which is recommended. So yep, I'm going to select that. And here it's going to ask for your provider, right? So basically this is just the LLM that you want the Hermes agent to use. And again, there are a lot of choices here that you can pick from, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use the Anthropic key. And again, if you don't know how to get these API keys, what you can do is go over to platform.claude.com. And what you need to do is get signed up, sign in, put in your billing details and top up at least $5 for it to run. And what you can do is head over to settings/keys, and then under here you can hit create key, and you could do Hermes API key to just identify the API key that you're creating. And basically it's going to generate this API key. Of course, keep it safe. What I'm going to do is I'm going to revoke this API key right after the recording. But once you have that API key, you can head back to the options here and hit Anthropic. And here it's going to ask for the authentication method. And you don't specifically have to always use the API key for Claude. You can also use the Pro or Max subscription. But here I'm going to choose the API key route. So I'm going to choose number 2. I'm going to key in number 2, Anthropic API key. And it's going to ask for me to input my API key. So I'm going to paste my API key from earlier. And it's not going to show anything because it's going to keep it secure. But you can hit enter once you have Control V or pasted the API key in there. So there it says API key saved. You can select your default model, and here I'm going to choose Claude Opus 4.6 as the default model. And it's also going to ask whether we want to set up a messaging platform. And yes, I'm going to set up the messaging platform now. And here, there's a few messaging platforms that we're going to choose from: Discord, Slack, Signal, email. But the easiest one to set up is Telegram. So we're going to select Telegram. And the way you select that is to hit the spacebar and not just enter on Telegram, right? So hit the spacebar and then enter on Telegram. And here it's going to ask for the Telegram bot token. And in order to get the bot token, what you want to do is to go over to your Telegram app and under chat, search for Botfather and make sure that's the one with the blue tick and hit Botfather and press start. It's basically a service to create bots on Telegram. So what you want to do here is to go new bot, so /new bot, right? And then choose a name for your bot. Okay, so we're going to call it Hermes Demo Agent. Okay, so we're going to call it Hermes. So this is a bot name that is, inside Telegram. So here we're going to call it Hermes Demo 999 bot. Make sure that it ends with a bot because that is just one of the conventions that you need to follow. And there you go. That's been created. And basically the token to the bot is the one right here. And again, you want to keep this safe because anyone with a token can actually take control of your bot, right? So I'm going to revoke this right after the recording as well. So go back to the setup here. What you want to do is also paste the bot token in the Telegram bot token part here and hit enter. And that's already saved. And here it's going to ask for allowed user IDs, right? So what's doing right here is basically restricting anybody else that is not the user ID that you have approved to chat with the bot, right? So this is a pretty good security to have. And what you want to do is to figure out your user ID on Telegram. And the way you would do that is go back to Telegram and type in the words user info. Pick the one that has the green guy profile with the blue crown right here. And once you hit the chat, hit the start bar, and immediately it will return to you your Telegram ID. So this is my Telegram ID right here. So I'm going to just copy that, go back to my setup here and paste the ID that will be allowed to chat with the bot. As the home channel, yes. Okay, so I'm using my user ID as the home channel. Click Y, yes. So launch Hermes chat now. I'm going to hit yes as well on this. So right off the bat, you see some differences between Hermes Agent user experience versus Openclaw. Because Hermes Agent has the TUI or the terminal user interface first, which you can chat with Hermes directly on the TUI here without just setting up the Telegram and chatting it through there. Openclaw, of course, has the gateway and has that little portal that you can go in and also be able to chat with it there. But here with Hermes Agent, if you were to run it on your terminal, you actually primarily be able to chat with it through the terminal itself. Again, Openclaw can do that, but it's not right off the bat and not the primary way that you would immediately interact with it. So here I'm going to initiate it by just saying hello. So it's going to initialize the agent. All right, so it's now responding to me. Hello, how can I help you today? All right, so now we want to chat with it on Telegram, right? So if you were to go back to Telegram, and here, remember, we actually created the bot on Botfather earlier. And what we want to do is actually just click on the link that, we will be able to chat with the bot on Telegram with. Again, our name was Hermes Demo Agent. So we're going to hit start here. It's not going to do anything. And even if you were to interact with it right now, it's not going to reach the actual agent or Hermes because we don't have the gateway running just yet. So what we want to do is to actually have Hermes run the gateway or exit into the terminal and actually run the Hermes gateway command in order to start a gateway. So I'm going to ask Hermes to run the gateway instead. Let me just type it here. So it's coming up with a response here. And as you can see, it's coming up with a key command that you would usually key into your terminal right away instead of doing it with a chat here. But I'm going to ask it to Hermes gateway start instead and see if it's able to do that for me instead of having me go into the terminal myself, But of course, if you want to go into the terminal yourself and type in that command, you can essentially go back to your document manager page and go into the terminal by clicking terminal here and be able to just type the Hermes gateway start command and it will start the gateway. So here it's asking me for this permission to start a gateway because, it's a command that I'm asking it to run instead of me going to the terminal. So I'm going to allow this once. And there you go. It says gateway is up and running. Here's the status. All right, platform, Telegram connected. Okay, so let's go back to a Telegram here. And now I'm going to say hi. So there you go. Hi, Mark. How's it going? How can I help you today? Okay, cool. So our agent is now connected to Telegram. And the next thing that we want to do is now to give it some tools, give it some context, give it some skills, right? All the stuff that we do with Openclaw as well. So skills, again, are recipes on how you want them to do certain tasks. Hermes has this capability to compound its own skills and evolve its own skills, which makes it slightly better in that sense over Openclaw. But of course, you might want to review that from time to time because it's going to start building skills that maybe you don't want it to build, right? So if you're wanting to let Hermes have access to some of the skills that have been built in within the Hermes agent documentation, right? You can go to Skills Hub, which is just the link up here, which I'll put in the description down below as well. So there are lots of skills out here for depending on the domains that you want, social media and stuff like that, productivity, maps, nano PDF, health, assistant health, a lot of stuff over here that, you can actually make use of, Claude design, humanizer. But essentially, you want to be a little bit careful and selective when you're ingesting these skills. So you might want to tell Hermes, which skill that it should ingest instead of letting it have full access into, the skills hub and downloading skills that it thinks it might need, right? So there you go with the skills. I'm skipping the personalization bit of the agent because I think, everyone has a different way of doing that. But I want to show is how you would connect these to tools that makes it super, super useful. And I'm going to do a few examples. But the first one that is very important, very useful is the capability for it to search the internet and not just through the browser or natively doing it on its own, but we want to connect it with a tool like Brave API or Firecrawl that's able to search the internet, right? So Brave API works really well with Openclaw, but here we're going to go over to Firecrawl, and again, I'll link this down in the description below. Firecrawl is basically just an AI-enabled scraper tool, which works really well with LLMs. You can think of it just as giving your agent a very effective tool to crawl or scrape the internet. And it's free up to a certain limit, and then after that you have to pay for it, so depending on the volume that you're intending to search. But in my experience, it has been pretty useful, pretty handy. What you want to do once you get into Firecrawl is go over to the API keys, and same thing here, you want to create your API keys, right? So yeah, I'm going to call it Hermes Demo API Key, okay? And I'm going to hit Create Key, okay? And again, you want to keep this secret as with any API keys. I'm going to revoke this after the recording. But once you have that, go back to your TUI and just ask it, like you to connect at Firecrawl as a tool with all the necessary dependencies. And again, it's just easier to ask it to actually go through the documentation itself, install it, and connect the tool. Rather than traditionally, you would read through the documentation in the first place and figure out how to call the API and stuff like that. But now with the modern LLMs, you can essentially ask it to do all of that for you, right? So here's the API key. I'm going to paste the API key here. Again, just chat with it in natural language. Tell it what you want it to connect to, and it should be able to fetch the documentation. If you want to give it a leg up, give it some help, give it some context, you can even paste a link of the documentation for it to go through, right? So here, I'm just going to tell it that. So as you can see, it is doing basically things that we would, as humans would do is if we want to connect Firecrawl in the past with anything, right? When we were doing a lot more stuff on end-to-end, we connected Firecrawls a lot, and we had to go to documentation ourselves and actually do everything manually into end-to-end. But now you can essentially ask it to do all of that and install a connection for you while you just sit back and wait. And of course, it's going to use up a couple of tokens here, but I think it's well worth your time. And while it's doing that, I also want to point out when I'm setting up stuff and kind of pasting the API key to Hermes agent, I like to do it in the TUI instead of doing it in the Telegram chat, because Telegram chat tend to retain, some sort of history and chat history and stuff like that. So now it says Firecrawl setup is complete. I actually wanted to scrape this particular website. It's called Quiver Quantitative. It's a very useful website. What it does is it actually tracks any trading, stock buys, stock sells from the US Congress members. So, Republican, Democratic senators, policymakers who are making stock market asset moves. So I want to track that because, it might show me certain signals on certain stocks. So in this case, I'm asking Hermes, can you scrape this particular website for trades done for NVIDIA stocks by US Congress members? Tell me the names and purchase sizes, right? In the past 6 months, let's say. Okay, so I'm going to tell it that. I'm telling it through Telegram because now I'm not asking it to set up, connect. I'm not sharing any API keys, so I can just chat with it on Telegram. As you can see, because I didn't ask it to use Firecrawl, it automatically just used the browser right here, right? So it is facing some issues because it's just doing that. And this is actually a great way to show you guys, if you didn't connect it with Firecrawl, what happens if you're just using a browser to navigate. It's not going to give you a very good outcome. But okay, let me stop this and let's do it again with Firecrawl, right? Because otherwise it's doing all of these things and trying to fetch the trades. So now instead I'm asking it, can you use Firecrawl and scrape, and do the same thing, right? Past 6 months. Okay, so because I didn't build any skills for Firecrawl, what it's doing is actually searching for any available skills for Firecrawl before it's actually utilizing it. So actually the good practice is always install the skill first before actually asking it to do it. And that's probably the reason why it didn't use Firecrawl to begin with for any searches, any scrapes, because the skills would have told it to do that. So let's see what it's coming back with now that it has Firecrawl fully set up. All right, so it's coming back with the results here, past 6 months, any trades involving NVIDIA. So 30 total trades, 13 purchases. So both Republican and Democratic sides, senators are actually doing purchases of NVIDIA here. And, these are purchases, these are sales. So it looks like there are more sales than purchases in the past 6 months. Notably, Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic House has filed somewhere between $1 to $5 million worth of sales in NVIDIA as late as December 24th, 2025. So let's see. Cool. All right. So once we have this report, if we want it to run a cron job, or rather the on-schedule task, let's say we want this to run, every week, let's say, we can simply tell it to do, can you schedule this for every week on Monday at 9 a.m. So there you go. The cron job or the scheduled task has been created, which is scheduled at every Monday at 9 a.m. delivered here to this chat. You'll scrape Quiver Quant with Firecrawl each week, send you the latest 6 months of Congress trades with names, amounts, and summary. Let me know if you want to adjust the time or add any other stocks. Cool. All right. So that's an easy way to give you periodic updates of a scrape from some website. And of course, there are many other use cases like these. And one of the very useful places which you can grab any of these tools, you can see the Instagram scraper here, Facebook scraper, Amazon scraper, is Apify, right? So it allows, essentially connection to any kind of workflows as well as APIs that are available out there. But of course, you do need to set up your account, and with the same concept, you do need to create your own API tokens. And the way you would connect it, again, I would go into the TUI, the same way we have connected it to Firecrawl, and tell it, hey, I want to connect this particular tool, let's say the Instagram scraper, right? I would essentially paste a link to this documentation and tell it, hey, I want you to connect to the Instagram scraper and use it as a primary tool to scrape Instagram. Here's the API token, and save it in your environment file. And essentially, it's going to be able to connect it the way you would connect it into Firecrawl. And of course, if you want to do it yourself, you can go into the environment file and do the configuration yourself. But it's just much easier now to ask the LLMs to do it on its own. It does take a bit of the tokens, but it saves you a lot of time, especially if you're just starting out. Makes it a lot easier, right? Last but not least, you probably want to activate the voice mode. So there's a documentation here for the voice mode. You can copy that. You don't actually need to. It should actually know where it is by a quick search, but I like to give it a leg up and go back to your chat with Hermes agent, and you can tell it, can you install and set up the voice mode with all the necessary dependencies to make it work on Telegram? So I'm going to hit enter on that. Okay, cool. So it looks like it set up everything that is required to be installed to make the voice to text work. So in order to make sure that everything's up and running, it also needed to restart a gateway. So it was able to do that all on its own without any additional step required, right? And again, this is completely free for Telegram. So I didn't need to subscribe to anything to make the voice mode work. So let's try the voice mode now and see if it's actually capturing the input. Hey, can you hear this? This is a test. Of course, you can't actually hear anything. It's just reading the text that's been transcribed to text. So that was kind of a silly question, but let's see if it's responding with anything. So it says, yep, I can hear you loud and clear. Voice message came through just fine. What can I help you with? All right, so now you have your voice mode all set up. So that's it. That's an easy way to get set up with Hermes agent on a one-click deploy on VPS on Hostinger. And again, if you are interested to take a spin with Hostinger, I'll leave the link to that in the description down below. Of course, use my promo code if you want an extra 10% off with that. And of course, this is sort of an intro to deploying Hermes on VPS. Let me know if I should make a more advanced build video, and I'll get into that as well. And as always, if you find videos like these useful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. It really does help a lot, and I'll see you on the next one.